060
9 minutes before 8 is the time. Come back to our conversation about travel and the would seem to be a degree of confusion over that in a moment. But this has been billed as the biggest shake-up to the railways in more than a quarter of a century, and many would argue it's long before time. So said to be the Williams-Shapps plan for rail, published as a white paper. Details now from Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, as in Williams-Shapps plan. He joins me now. OK, so why is this not just a rebranding of Network Rail or British Rail under another flag? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Because what it does is actually brings the entire railway together, simplified under one new organisation, Great British Railways, which will sell the tickets, it will run the system, it will be in charge of the timetabling, and actually that's partly where this came from, because you may recall 3 years ago this week, the May 2018 disastrous timetable changes, which sent the entire network into meltdown, and nobody could tell who was responsible because the thing was too fragmented. There wasn't really anybody responsible, and it seeks to deal with all of that.
Why will it do better? If you recall, you're a young man, but we used to make jokes about British Rail. It was the stuff of stand-up comedy routines. Why will it be better?
Yeah, well, it won't be British Rail. That's one thing. But under British Rail, you're quite right. Not only did the number of passengers fall year on year, they closed down stations and closed down lines. And the sandwiches were terrible. They were the butt of all the jokes, I recall. We're not going back to those bad old days. This is not nationalisation. What this is putting an organisation, Great British Railways, in charge of the whole network, the guiding mind, or as the media often like to say, the fat controller behind it all. But we'll still have the private enterprise of companies running the railway services themselves, and they'll be bidding for those contracts, driving better services. But the control, that you buy the ticket from Great British Railways, so all the control of the whole of the system will be under their guidance.
OK, so if I were to be running Virgin or Arriva, what's in it for me? Why would I want to get involved?
What you do is run a great service, and you're paid for running the trains on time and making them clean. So the contract is just all about the passenger and making sure that the passenger's journey is excellent. At the moment, the old franchise agreements, we've suspended them now, but the old franchise agreements became so complex that it was almost impossible to see how it benefited the passenger. It certainly wasn't about running trains on time. And anyway, there were 400 different people involved in this existing setup of Network Rail and these train companies who literally spent their time arguing about whose fault a delay was, litigating and the rest of it. All of that nonsense goes with a single trusted national brand of Great British Railways.
And just lastly on this, what can you tell me? There's a sort of carnet offering or eight tickets over a certain period. Secretary of State, how would that work?
Yeah, well, I should say these reforms are going to take some years to complete. So it's not an overnight thing, but a sort of a down payment, if you like. The advantage of bringing this all together is that we're already going to, from next month, from the 21st of June, be able to offer flexible season tickets, sort of carnet, as you describe it, of tickets where people who may now, because of the coronavirus, for example, although the trend was moving in this direction anyway, just want to work 2 or 3 days a week, or rather travel to work 2 or 3 days a week, perhaps working from home the rest of the time, and can now buy a flexible season ticket without having to decide how many days they'll be travelling on any specific week, and it will work out cheaper for them to do that. And that's one of the very early advantages of bringing this all under Great British Railways.
OK, so this, effectively is the government giving the green light to working from home then, not to come back into the office in the way the Prime Minister indicated.
Yeah, I think we recognise even before the pandemic that actually there was a year-on-year decrease in the sale of season tickets, although we were still seeing big year-on-year increases in the number of people using the railways. And by the way, under privatisation, twice as many people were using the railways. I mean, it was a massive success story as far as people using the railways. It was just too disorganised. So we were already seeing that trend, fewer season tickets. We recognise that. And, of course, coronavirus, I think, will accelerate that. But I think people will just want to use the railways differently, and flexible season tickets will give people that opportunity.
Let's come to another travel matter, which I would imagine you knew you'd get a question on. Alarming, confusing, illogical, the traffic light system. Not my words, that of a travel expert, indeed a travel chief executive. How proud are you to have presided over this shambles, Secretary of State?
No, I don't agree. Another travel expert, one of the bosses at Gatwick, who said he thinks that the government advice is perfectly clear. Let me tell you exactly what I said when I launched the system Friday week ago, which is in a green list country, of which there are relatively few. You're able to travel. You don't have to quarantine when you get home. In amber and red, you must quarantine. Amber at home, in red, in a government secure hotel, and you'll have to take pre-departure tests on all of them. And in amber and red, a day 2 and a day 8 test, and in amber, you even take a day 5 test for test to release. It is, we are not encouraging people to travel in amber and red categories, and we're certainly not encouraging people to travel for holidays in amber either. So you've got to have a system of some type. Right, and every country in the world essentially is put into the middle, the amber category, until proved otherwise, either because they've got an exceptional record on coronavirus and they get into the green category, or because there's a problem and they go into the red category.
5 million people have trips booked, mostly to mainland Europe. What would you tell them?
Well, right now there aren't many locations. In fact, I can only really
this is not of course, but in coming months. In coming months, what would you say to them, Secretary of State?
I'd say, obviously, we're all going to have to be patient, because what's happened is the UK has ended up getting well ahead in terms of the number of Brits who've been vaccinated by comparison to elsewhere in Europe. But in a couple of months' time, I hope they will be catching up, and we'll have to see what happens. We'll go on the science and the evidence entirely. But we do want people to be able to travel, Nick. I'm not, we are a global country.
Like
people,
Secretary of State.
People leave the country. Well, to give you an example,
we have a knockout vaccination programme, which is the envy of the world, courtesy of British scientists, the NHS, the British military, and the great blokes and women are out there doing it every day, many of whom are unpaid volunteers. So we have some... The European Union are likely to say, come one, come all to Britons, but your government is going to say, yeah, sure, but you have to quarantine when you come home.
Yeah,
what was the purpose of the vaccinations?
Well, we'll be reviewing the list every 3 weeks. The next review is the beginning of June. So the who's on the green list will change. But so
we know there will be more. One can hope that the green list will grow and the amber list will shrink.
And one would hope the green, as those countries vaccinate and get on top of the situation, you'd hope that's the case. But I can't. I don't want to, pretend otherwise. We are taking a very cautious approach. Why? Because the British people have spent much of the last year in lockdown, and we don't want people to have to go back there again. People come forward in record numbers for these vaccines, and we want to make sure that as we unlock, we're doing so absolutely safely. And I know there are people out there who say, never mind, caution to the wind, let's just reopen this thing up. That's not where the British people are. People want to be cautious about this and get this right. And that is what we're doing.
Do you think the British people want to be in a situation where, I'm going to call them the travel Stasi, could knock on their door and levy a fine of £10,000? Is that a Conservative policy, Secretary of State?
Well, very simply, please don't travel. Obviously, to a red list country goes without saying, and only Brits can actually return from red
fine.
lists.
These are the days of East Germany, aren't they?
Only if you deliberately go out and break the law. And if
you
could
have said that in East Berlin.
No, but hold on a minute. Hold on. I don't want to take issue with you, Nick. But there's a bit of a difference between breaking the law in a way which could affect other people's health. Coronavirus kills people, and I think what happened in East Germany under communism, if you don't mind me saying. And yes, there are big fines and prison sentences if you deliberately choose to ignore your responsibility to protect other people. But the reality is that people should only really be travelling at the moment to the green list countries where you can come back and you don't need to quarantine.
But if there is a family funeral to attend, can you go?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And business. If
right.
there is a legitimate business, I don't know. You have to sell your flat in Spain or whatever it might be. Can you go then?
For an exceptional or extreme, or you mentioned something like a family funeral, perhaps somebody, a relative who is seriously ill, and you're concerned about them. That is an acceptable reason to travel to an amber country. That's right.
And the Daily Telegraph reporting today, around 300,000 people will have flown to amber list countries by the end of this weekend. When they come home, they're all going to be under surveillance, of course.
Well, I don't specifically recognise those figures. So it doesn't match with what we've seen in the last few days. But if people travel to an amber list country, they will know that they have to do the 10 days self-isolation unless they test release. A whole series of tests, quite a bit of cost, and they may just come to the conclusion, we'll wait for more countries to be on the green list.
Okay, or last minute or so with you, many of them people might choose to stay at home for their holidays, which means they might need to use the motorways, and we have fresh pressure now on hard shoulders. You and I have spoken to this before, or so-called smart motorways. We have the president of the AA, who's no longer a fan, or if indeed he ever was, and we also have the assistant chief constable, I think, of West Midlands, saying that he would prefer the safety of a hard shoulder. Are you now ready to say, or at least accept, that there should be no more, and we need a further review of these lanes? Secretary of State.
As you know, because we've spoken about it a few times before, I share those concerns about smart motorways. And when I came in as Transport Secretary, the first thing I did was ordered a review, a stock take, and then insisted on 18 different things to do to improve them. A year on, I've gone further with that, introducing, for example, things like the radar stop detection systems, which in my view should have been in these systems from the outset to make sure that you can close down lanes instantly. It is worth saying, just for the purposes of balance, Nick, that our motorways are amongst the safest roads in the world. Smart motorways actually kill fewer people per 100 million miles driven, which is the measure that's used on our roads. And every other road in this country, an A road, a B road, is vastly more dangerous, I'm afraid, in terms of deaths and fatalities. But
a B road
I want to make
is
these
more
things
dangerous than the hard lose. A B road, a country lane, is more dangerous than a hard shoulder.
100 million miles driven, massively so. And it might be interesting to share the figures with you. For example, hard shoulders are not the panacea that some people imagine. 1 in 12 deaths occur on the hard shoulder because cars tend to career over and hit them. So they're not actually a particularly safe place. And the setback
better than not having anything
areas.
If
I was going to say the setback emergency areas, there've been no deaths on those, and I want to see more of those, which is why I've ruled, for example, they have to be 3/4 of a mile apart, rather than, as we saw happen, them just disappear from the motorway network entirely.
And I'm sorry to delay you. One word, if I can, on Hammersmith Bridge. There's partial good news for the good folk of West London in that it's opening, not for vehicles, but at least people walk over it, I understand, in the summer. A word on that, Secretary of State.
Well, look, I'm pushing very, very hard. Unfortunately, I don't own that bridge as Transport Secretary. It's actually owned by the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. It's entirely their responsibility to fix it. I've been trying to cajole them and, of course, Transport for London to get the job done. Transport for London, I've been having to bail out to the tune of £3 billion with more money coming, so they've not been in a great position to do it. And I'm trying to bring all the parties together and sort of almost knock heads together to get this thing.
Isn't that the job of the London Mayor? Shouldn't Mayor Khan
possible.
be doing more on this, Secretary
In
of
my
State?
view, yes.
He should actually be banging heads together and trying to force this open a little more, shouldn't he?
Yes, it is. The infrastructure, unfortunately, I mean, if it was mine, as bridges are elsewhere in the country, we would have had this done by now. But as I say, actually, it belongs to the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. They are the owners. They're the ones who are supposed to get it reopened, usually with the help of TfL, and that help hasn't been forthcoming from TfL and the Mayor as yet.
Grateful for your time. Thanks very much indeed. Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary, appearing here on LBC, where we're late to the news, 4 minutes after 8. Simon Conway.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation.